and then share my screen. All right, awesome. So just a couple of announcements before I get into class content. So again, apologies for the mishaps related to the peer review. I thought the peer review process would be really easy to do on Canvas, but apparently it wasn't. So I did give you guys an extension on that. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you complete your peer review by tonight and make sure you submit your draft as well. By tonight. And then also your final draft of the feature article is now due tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. So it's no longer due today, it's due tomorrow. All right, so let's go ahead and delve into how to write a marketing communications plan. So I'm basically going to grossly condense what you will kind of go into more detail with the public communications campaign course that I keep referring to. The campaign process in marketing is very similar to public relations. There are some key differences, but for the most part, there's a lot of overlapping between the two. Of course, we have to figure out the problem that we want to address in a campaign, and then more specifically, who our client is or who we're serving. Also, who do we want to target in our campaigns, our target audiences? What's the approach to our campaign? So we call that a strategy. What does that strategy look like tangibly? That's a tactic. And then how can we ensure that these tactics have been implemented correctly? How can we ensure that our efforts are successful? That's more so what we call evaluative research. So again, I'm gonna really breeze past that. If you are really interested in campaign work, whether it's public relations, advertising, or marketing, I strongly recommend that you take public communications campaigns. That's a class where you guys get to work with an actual business and design a public relations campaign proposal for that business. It's extremely hands-on. And I think if you're a strategic communication major, you have to take that course anyways in order to graduate. But it's a very rewarding class because, like I said, it's very hands-on and you get more of that client relations experience that you might not be able to get in other classes. All right, so like I said, the first thing that we want to do in a marketing communications campaign or a public relations communication campaign is, of course, figure out, our problem or the issue. So what exactly are we focusing on in our campaign? And then after we do that, we want to kind of know the client more, the business that we're helping out essentially. And if we're, what we call in-house PR, so for example, PR at Ohio State and we, work for Ohio State, we want to do what's called a SWOT analysis. So many of you guys probably have heard a SWOT analysis in some of your other classes. So SWOT analysis basically stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So again, this is when we analyze the client that we serve, or we analyze the business for whom we're putting on a campaign. And so I just want to kind of break this down a little bit for you guys. Strengths and weaknesses are what we call internal factors. These are factors from within the organization that can have a positive or negative impact on the business or organization. Conversely, we have what's called opportunities and threats. So those are essentially external factors that can have a positive or negative impact on the business. Now, I know that sounds pretty straightforward, and for the most part it is, but sometimes when we get to think about some of these various factors, it seems like it can be an internal or an external factor, can be kind of difficult. So I'm going to run through a few examples here, but again, just to kind of summarize this slide, a SWOT analysis is when we do this more robust analysis over a business or the organization that we work for. So some examples here on my next slide. I'm going to again break this down by each category within the SWOT analysis. So we have what's called a strength, of course. So those are internal factors that benefit the organization. So let's say there's something like a really unique product, right? So Apple oftentimes will market their products this way. So they're very well known, they're high quality, right? So that's a factor that essentially they can control. That's another, I guess you can say, key distinct factor between internal and external factors. So they can have an impact on the uniqueness, or what we call the unique selling proposition of the product. let's say that their staff, the business staff, is very knowledgeable, right? That's going to have a tremendous impact on the brand, because it's going to enhance the credence of the brand. So those would be internal factors, because again, those are factors from within the organization that can have a positive impact on the business or the brand. Now, conversely, we have what are called weaknesses. So again, those are still internal factors, but they have the opposite impact. So they have a negative impact, or they somewhat undermine the organization. So, even though Apple is very well known for selling, high quality products, the price of their products tends to be very, very, expensive or very high. So that could pose as a weakness. That could, essentially, deter some people from buying their products. Perhaps they're not reaching out to a particular market because their products are so high, right? So that could limit, right, their market share and who they're reaching out to, essentially. In the campaigns course that I keep referring to, I think it was a couple years ago, we worked with a business who, even though their product was really, really good, they were very overwhelmed by orders because they had limited staff, right? And so because they had limited staff, that affected their customer service, that affected their ability to get the products out there to their customers. So essentially that affected their ability to meet the customer demand, right? So that would serve as a weakness. And then we have opportunities and threats. So once more, those are external factors that can either have a positive or negative impact on the brand. These are typically factors that are beyond the business's control to a certain degree. So we tend to have more control over those internal factors than we do those external factors. So an example of that would be, let's say that we need to reach out to a new audience that has a huge buying power. That would be another example of an opportunity. Let's say that we need to change locations, like physical locations, in order to get to that market, right? So that's another example of an opportunity. I notice a lot of fast food restaurants, at least in the past 5 to 10 years, have changed their product quality. And what I mean by that is a lot of consumers are becoming more health conscious. And as a result, fast food restaurants have had to adjust, right, to that consumer trend. So that would be a great example of how trends can serve as an opportunity for businesses as well. They can also work as a threat depending upon how that business responds to it. So again, using fast food restaurants as an example, again, if we're becoming more health conscious as a society, then that could be a threat to those businesses that are selling food that's not necessarily the healthiest, food, or the healthiest food. And then we have threats. So again, those are external factors that are essentially negative or can have some type of negative impact on the brand. So an example of that, of course, would be competitors, but we can use competitors' opportunities, and I'll talk about that later on. So competitors can, take up our market share in the marketplace. They can be a threat because they might take away some of our potential customers, right? And again, competitors are typically those who are in the same industry as us. So we're not referring to people who may, disagree with our business values. Those are more so opponents. Competitors are people who are in the same industry as us. And then new legislation. So I remember when the Affordable Care Act was passed, I believe that was back in 2014 or so, a lot of small business owners kind of saw that as a threat because, or depending upon how large your business is, because they then had to pay for health insurance for their employees. So it wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to, but they were more so thinking about the cost, right, from a business standpoint. So any type of legislation that is passed, depending upon where you fall or how that legislation affects your business, that definitely can be a threat. So here are just some other examples. We worked with a business, again, in that campaigns course, called Belgian Iron Waffle Company. And here's an example SWOT analysis. Here on this slide, I'm only including strengths and weaknesses, and then the next slide, I'll include opportunities and threats. So you guys can kind of see for yourself some of the differences between strengths and weaknesses, but all in all, they're all internal factors, right? So the first one with strengths reads that Belgian Iron is a unique and memorable name relatable to the product that they're selling. So Belgian Iron, or basically sold Belgian waffles, which are very different from American style waffles. They are kind of deemed as the original waffle, right? So that's very unique. You don't see that type of waffle here in the United States, let alone in Columbus. And then also, again, talking about the product later on, very unique and trendy. Now, weakness, they talked about their team members, their staff. So they admitted that some of their staff members were not necessarily very experienced in the restaurant industry or didn't have a lot of knowledge about the Belgian, waffle. So that could definitely pose as a weakness. And then in terms of how you make the waffle, it can be very, very difficult and challenging. There's a particular way to do it, and that could, have an impact on the ease in which that product is out there to the customer. And it also can have an impact on the quality of the product as well, depending upon whether or not people know how to actually make that type of waffle. And then we have, again, opportunities and threats. So an opportunity here, because of the location, this particular restaurant could basically garner more foot traffic and could perhaps partner up with special events as posed right there. And then a threat here, again, they listed competition in the area, and then also weather, right? So that could have a tremendous impact in terms of the desire of customers to want to actually go out and get something at a restaurant. So hopefully this SWOT analysis will, further illustrate some of the differences between what we call strengths and weaknesses, and then opportunities and threats. Any questions over that? All right. Okay, so after we've conducted this SWOT analysis, now we're going to go ahead and figure out what do we want to accomplish in our campaign, and that basically is your goal statement, right? And so here are a couple of examples of goal statements that we might see in a marketing campaign. So it could be just to expand our customer base. It could be more of a profit goal, right? So to try to make sure that we are hitting a specific sales figure by the end of a fiscal period. And then also we might want to hone in more on our brand personality or our brand identity, as the third point mentions there. Or we could try to make sure that we're reaching out to a even more specific demographic or market, as opposed to just wanting to reach out to a broad market there, as posed in the fourth point. So again, this list is not exhaustive. These are just examples of goal statements. For the final writing portfolio, you don't have to write a goal statement for a campaign. You won't be doing campaign work, but I think it's relevant to know a goal statement in light of a campaign, because obviously that's important, right? So that is our opportunity to tell a client or to tell our boss, this is what we want to try to accomplish for the campaign. And then from there, once we kind of figured out our campaign goal, we want to go ahead and figure out who's going to be the most affected or the most relevant to this campaign, given the goal that we're trying to achieve. And that's essentially our target audience. Make sure that you're being very intentional about when you're selecting your target audience. It's not a situation where you're just, well, I think it's a good idea, or, that seems like a pretty, attractive demographic or attractive audience to target. You want to make sure that you're not just choosing target audience for the sake of choosing them in a campaign. Again, look at whether or not they have an impact on the brand. Look at whether or not, given the problem that you're trying to focus on or address in your campaign, whether or not that audience is going to be affected or relevant by that, or relevant to that issue. And so once we selected our target audience, we want to make sure that we do analyses over that target audience. So if you guys can't, guess by now, we do a lot of analyses in researching a campaign. It's not just creating an advertisement or, landing a TV interview. If you're talking about public relations, there's a lot of back end work that goes into maybe what you see on the, at the end of the campaign. But anyway, so yes, we're going to do what's called an audience analysis. And one way that we do that is through looking at the audience's demographic and psychographic information. I'm sure many of us, know what demographic information is. So that's essentially, the information that you provide in the US Census, right? So your age, your race, gender, physical location, so where do you live, marital status, income, things of that, nature. Very, I guess you can say, definable or, black and white variables, if you will. Now, psychographic information is a little more vague, but not to the point where I don't think you guys can understand it. So these are basically the shared interest, values, hobbies, and lifestyles of that particular audience. So if we were to use, for example, college students as an example, traditional college students, because we do have to consider the fact that the college student demographic or the feel of the college student, the makeup of a college student body is changing a lot. But you know, when you think about the typical Ohio State college student, demographically, you're looking at those who are between the ages of 18 to 24. Here at Ohio State, in terms of race, they're predominantly Caucasian or white. Most of them are single, so they're not married. Income, they tend to be, you know, financially strapped if we're not taking their parents' income into consideration. I believe at Ohio State, there's slightly more women, so about 51% women, and what I mean by women is cisgender women, and about 49% cisgender men. Unfortunately, in terms of, at least to my knowledge, I'm not sure if Ohio State considers transgender in their final demographic analyses. They should, they definitely should. They tend to not have children, so family size tends to be, you know, one, so that just that college student. And again, of course, occupation is, you know, college student. Psychographically, if you had to guess, and this is where it kind of gets ethically a little dicey, and what I mean by that is we don't want to engage in stereotyping when we're trying to analyze our audiences. And so that's why it's important to verify some of your claims through secondary research or research that's already been conducted, you know, online about that particular audience. But psychographically, I would guess at least that Ohio State students love, you know, Ohio State athletics, whether that's basketball, soccer, or football. So they enjoy going to sports events. They love, you know, socializing, I should say. So whether that's going to parties or whether that's going to a coffee shop and talking to someone. So social life is very, very, very valuable to a lot of Ohio State students. Ohio State students tend to be very health conscious. So a lot of them will work out at the RPAC and be, again, very intentional about their food choices. And then also in terms of we're looking at political attitudes, they tend to lean a little more left, even though there definitely is those or are those students who are, you know, across the political spectrum. So that example that I just gave you guys hopefully kind of showed you all the difference between what we call demographic information and psychographic information. And then just going back to psychographic information, just in case you're still like, I'm not sure if I'm quite getting this. Remember this little acronym here. I learned this when I was in college and it always helped me out. So basically psychographic information are the shared values, attitudes, and lifestyles of a particular audience. That's a little different, or actually a lot different from demographic information. So here's an example that I give to my students a lot when I'm talking about an audience analysis. Again, just to kind of illustrate the key differences between what we might find in demographic information and psychographic information. So if we were trying to target, you know, female young professionals, demographically, of course, in terms of gender, we're talking about cisgender women, various ethnicities. So we're not just talking about one, you know, race, if you will. Young professional, we want to make sure that we're defining the age bracket here. So here I just put 25 to 34 years old. So not those who are just out of college, those who maybe had a couple of years underneath their belt of work experience. They're college educated, so they at least have an associate's degree. Income level, right? So $55,000. If you go to Chicago with $55,000, that's not going to really take you far. But again, I'm contextualizing it here in Columbus. A little less than half are married. And then for those who are not married, they're not in a rush to be married or have children. And they tend to live in urban areas like the short north, for instance, or German Village. Now, psychographically, again, so this demographic or this audience tends to be, you know, health conscious, so very intentional about their, you know, healthy lifestyle living. Altruistic, so they tend to want the, you know, greater good for society or be more inclined to share that value. And what I mean by relationship oriented, it's not romantic relationship, it's just more so they value that human connection. Goal oriented, so they definitely are very intentional about their career and their social life. So that's why I put that work hard, play hard mentality. They love to travel and they eat out a lot, especially around the brunch time, and they drink a lot of wine. So basically, I joke with my students all the time, this is me. have created a customer profile based upon, you know, someone like me. So hopefully, again, that just reiterates the point in terms of the key differences between demographic and psychographic information. Any questions over that? All right, so now that we've analyzed our audience, we want to first conduct market research before I get into the strategy section. I'm not going to cover market research only because it's covered in some of your other classes like industry research methods and again, public communication campaigns. It doesn't really have as much relevance in a writing course, but do know if you actually want to do campaign work, market research is honestly at the heart of a campaign. You don't want to propose strategies and tactics without first having some type of research, especially market research, to support your ideas. So after we've conducted our market research, then we're going to go ahead and propose some strategies. Strategies are basically the approach that we are trying to use in order to accomplish our campaign goal that we, you know, establish at the very beginning of the, you know, campaign process. And so in a marketing campaign, we typically see these three broad categories of, you know, market strategies or marketing strategies. There are a lot more than this. And honestly, if you're learning this in some of your other classes, they might use slightly different terms, but the actual concept is still the same. So in a campaign, we might want to focus on promoting the product, right? So that's what we call a product-oriented strategy. Very straightforward stuff. Then we have what's called a consumer-oriented strategy, when we're trying to focus on how can we make our brand fit into perhaps the interest and lifestyle of the consumer so that we can enhance that brand loyalty a bit. And then we have what we call marketplace strategy. So how can we look at our brand and envision and really communicate how our brand, our business is different from comparable brands or businesses like our competitors? What is it about, for example, Ohio State that makes it very different from other Big Ten universities like Michigan or, you know, Penn State, things of that sort? So those are three strategies that you might see or you'll probably see in some capacity in a marketing campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys more examples of these strategies in my next few slides. So again, going back to the product-oriented strategy, here are just some definitions. So again, focusing more on the product and selling that and promoting that, consumer-oriented, focusing more on our audiences, experiences, and how our brand, how our business or our product can fit into that lifestyle or the experience of our audiences. So an example of a product-oriented strategy that we might see in an advertisement, like really, you know, in real time in an advertisement, are the paper towel commercials or advertisements that we've seen for God knows how long. So here is Bounty basically comparing the quality of their product, the durability of their product compared to their competitor. They didn't mention it here, but they're just saying, you know, whoever is the leading ordinary brand of paper towels, they're basically arguing that their product is stronger, more absorbent than, you know, their competitor that, again, they're not mentioning here. So that would be an example of a product-oriented strategy because, again, they're focusing on trying to promote that product and focusing on the unique qualities of that particular product. And again, going back to that notion of unique qualities, that specific product-oriented strategy is called unique selling proposition. And again, I'm sure you guys have heard this in some of your other classes, especially if you're taking any business classes. So that is our opportunity as a business to basically communicate what is so unique or valuable about our brand, about our product, about what we're trying to sell. So the example that I always give to students that, you know, many of us can probably relate to, have seen commercials about, McDonald's is very much known for, you know, their French fries. Doesn't matter how you feel about their, you know, other foods or the brand as a whole, because again, I still think that they have a reputation of, you know, selling very unhealthy food, of course, but people still love their French fries, right? So that would be a great example of how a brand is known for, you know, a particular unique product, or how McDonald's has done a very good job in basically promoting one of their products that they're very well known for. And then in terms of consumer-oriented strategies, Some examples of that would be what we call lifestyle branding. An example of that is Matthew McConaughey and his LinkedIn ads. I think his first LinkedIn ad was released back in, gosh, I could be wrong when I say this, 2015 or so. And the lifestyle that they're trying to evoke in those particular ads are a lifestyle of luxury, right? This cool guy that everyone seems to like, that's, you know, perhaps wealthy. It seems like he can get whatever he wants. The LinkedIn ad is trying to essentially evoke that lifestyle of luxury in their advertisements. And then added to, that's basically the overall tone and feel of that strategy. So we might want to focus more so on an emotional appeal in order to connect our audience to, you know, our brand. So an example of that would be the Kia commercials, Kia hamster commercials, right? So Kia has used, at least in the past, they have used those little hamsters to kind of evoke humor, evoke a fun feel to their brand. And that's essentially what they want, again, associated with their brand. The fact that they're fun, they're humorous, they're hip, they're tangible. What I mean by that is they're not a luxury brand, they're for everyday people, right? So they're attainable, essentially. So those are some examples of consumer-oriented strategies. Any questions over that? All right, and then also we want to make sure that whatever we're proposing, whether strategies or tactics, or strategies and tactics, I should say, we want to make sure that we're within budget. That's very important that we don't go over budget. And if we do, we want to justify and have a pretty good justification as to why we're going over budget. Make sure that you understand what the budget is before you actually start proposing strategies and tactics. That will have a tremendous impact on what you can propose. So for example, nonprofit organizations tend to have, you know, less money when it comes to marketing compared to, you know, Fortune 500 companies. And sometimes you will see that in their marketing, sometimes, not all the time. And so with that being said, that's going to have a tremendous impact on the resources that are available to you, the people that you can hire, right? So again, consider that when you're proposing your strategies and tactics. And then also we have evaluation. So it is so important that we keep in mind how are we going to measure whether or not we've actually accomplished our campaign goal, right? So it's not enough to say, I think we did it, or I'm not sure if we actually reached that goal. You have to have research that we would conduct at the end of the campaign after it's all said and done to basically measure whether or not we actually hit our goal. I cannot stress how much that is important. And honestly, what we need to do is conduct evaluative research throughout the entire campaign process. And what I mean by that is as soon as you implement that first tactic, you should be evaluating, I guess you can say, the lifespan of that tactic. How well is it performing? And that way you can adapt and adjust that tactic if for whatever reason, halfway through the campaign, it's not working as well as, you know, you had hoped it had worked. So again, evaluative research provides a lot of credibility to what we're doing. In the public relations industry, we have to prove our credibility a lot to business owners and to clients because oftentimes they don't think about public relations as a maintenance business strategy. And what I mean by that is they oftentimes think about public relations, you know, synonymous with crisis communication. They don't think about PR until, you know, crap hits the fan, and then they need someone to clean it up, to do brand management, reputation management, things of that sort. But the best PR is PR that is proactive in nature. And that's why if you engage in that proactive PR, it can definitely enhance your evaluative research, at least in my opinion, my experience working in this industry. All right, so that's it for today's class. So next week, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit more about your final writing portfolio next Tuesday. I'll deliver I think it's my last live lecture of this semester. Make sure that you guys either attend that lecture or just listen to the recording. Like I said, you guys will have an opportunity to write your own SWOT analysis and audience analysis for that final. So hopefully this lecture helped to clarify that a bit. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I look forward to reading your feature articles, and I will see you guys next week. Take care.